end quote. And he was referring to the other obligations, capacity supply obligations that were awarded. Those are still awarded, and the uncertainty regarding their delivery remains the same. So, in short, the reasons explained by the Public Utilities Commissions last year remain the same today. As regards to the ISO's statements that were relied upon by the Commissioner, number one, the ISO was estimating that 30% of the region's generating capacity could be gone in the next 10 years. That was the state of the facts before the Public Utilities Commission, as represented by the ISO New England report. That report is the latest report of January 2017, as I pointed out in our papers, says the exact same thing today. Similarly, the statement that 10,000 megawatts of retirement projects, are projects that are facing retirement, are at risk for closing, that statement that was presented to the Public Utilities Commission and would form the basis for his determination of need, that remains the same today. Again, in the 2017 ISO New England presentation. The statement that based on this is a quote from the Public Utilities Commission, based on the record, I am convinced that energy efficiency and renewable energy supply cannot at this time reliably meet the need for which the CREC project will be built. The record revealed that at least for the foreseeable future, generating units such as the proposed CREC facility are needed in order to meet Rhode Island's clean energy goals. End quote. That statement by the Public Utilities Commission, again, was just repeated in the 2017 ISO New England report by the CEO of the ISO. So these circumstances have not changed. So why would there be a need to go back and have that opinion redone? I suggest to you the reason they want to go back and do it is they did not like the conclusion that was reached in the advisory opinion process the first time, and they want to have a second crack at the apple. They want to have a redo of that. And I would suggest that's not the reason you should be sending matters back to the agencies. With regard to the costs, you heard some argument about how that the cost profile has gone up. What they don't tell you is that in the PUC's advisory opinion, the PUC had already explained that a detailed examination of costs that a private entity is going to undertake for a privately financed merchant project are not something that the Public Utilities Commission needs to delve into since the market was restructured in 1996. Again, there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of the EFSB statute, which was enacted in the 1980s at a time when the Public Utilities Commission regulated as a monopoly service the generation of electricity. Narragansett Electric was a regulated electric generating utility. Its costs that it was financing for a project were picked up at that time and paid for by ratepayers. Because of that fact, it was very important that the Public Utilities Commission delve into the costs and the assumptions that were being made by a project, because ratepayers were going to be asked to pick up that tab. That is no longer the case. And if you look at the PUC's opinion, it explains that in sufficient detail. They identify, quote, that the risk is on invenergy, not the ratepayers, end quote. Again, quote, if there are any savings from the capacity markets, the energy markets, and with the risks of the project falling on the applicant, that's all that they were looking at. Again, the reminder by the Public Utilities Commission, this is not a ratepayer finance project. So it was no longer a subject of concern to go into a detailed review. of the costs of a privately financed project. The town or CLF, they might have other curiosity reasons why they want to go poke around and look at the cost profiles of a private company. But that's not a sufficient reason for you to send this to the Public Utilities Commission. Now, shortly, a quick discussion on timing. The argument made by CLF was that, well, the original water supply plan was 11 pages, and you asked for 6 months. This water supply plan has 80 pages, so it doesn't make sense that you wouldn't ask for a complete 6 months. Again, I think that's a misleading argument. Of course, the first time you asked for advisory opinions, the agencies were reviewing I forget how many pages in the original application, but it was over 500 pages, reviewing every issue that the board was concerned about. Of course, the agencies needed a lot of time to do that. And to come full circle, again, we're back down to a very narrow scope of review for a water supply plan that is limited in scope and is less complicated than we originally proposed. So therefore, I would suggest that a full 6 months for review would not typically be necessary for an opinion on a narrow, discrete set of issues related to the water supply plan. One suggestion I have, in fact, to help move the process along is that to consider a status review or a update from the agencies, say at a halfway point. It may be that the agencies are able to render their review in a very short period of time, depending on their review of the water supply plan. For example, it may be that after looking through the water supply plan, an agency may determine that, this doesn't really seem to impact a lot of the environmental issues on my plate, or the traffic issues, or whatever. And they may, in fact, render a decision or be in a position to render a decision sooner than of the time that you then allot them. So you can ask for that update, and if it turns out you received the opinions earlier, great. And then you can set the schedule accordingly. Finally, with regard to experts, there was some comment about expert opinions. Again, our view is that this is a matter for the board's discretion. You certainly have the authority to go hire an expert to help you, to advise you on any of the aspects of an application. Actually, I think it's the board statute that we point to, Rhode Island General Laws 42-98-17, which is the specific statute that authorizes the board to employ on a contract basis experts. I think the rules that were cited by the counsel for CLF and for the town actually talk more about the board's ability to ask witnesses to come forward and testify at the board hearing process, meaning that you don't need to get pre-filed written testimony from an individual that you would like to hear from at the point of an at a final hearing process. So yes, you can hire an expert. The question for you is whether you should. We certainly do not think you need to hire experts for the lineup that the town suggested with regard to need and cost and environmental impacts, because you already have those experts available. The division has an expert, Mr. Parker, that was referred to earlier. He will be available for testimony. You have expert opinions from the planning department on jobs and economic impacts in the other areas that they are able to testify to. There'll be environmental issues. You're going to hear from experts, both from the town, from the state agencies, from our experts. So our point is that you have a sufficient supply of experts already at your disposal to assist you as you move forward to the evidentiary hearing process. If the board thinks it needs a particular expert, we're not going to stand in the way of that request. That's the board's call, and up to the board to decide. Thank you. Oh, may I just interrupt for 1 second? There was one area of opinions that I forgot to leave out, and that had to do with first with regard to the town, the other towns that were recommended, the town planning departments, the tax assessors, the town inputs through an advisory process from Gloucester, Smithfield, Johnston. Again, I think this wraps back to the point I was making earlier. Those towns will have no permitting overview of this project. Those towns do not provide permits and licenses to every truck that's bringing water through a state highway that just happens to go through their town. So I would suggest that it is not necessary to receive an advisory opinion process from each and every one of those towns, and that goes to the tax assessors as well. As the chair pointed out at the last meeting, there's plenty of opportunity for any town to provide its input or comments to the board with regard to any project that's before you. And that's different than saying, well, this is an advisory opinion process that we think you need to undertake. Again, state roads are being used to supply the water trucks. Now, last, with regard to, there were some other state agencies with regard to Department of Health, OER, the Water Resources Board. Again, with regard to the Department of Health, the Department of Health expressed a concern about, an ability to comment on the water supply plan. Again, remember, at that time, the Pasco Utilities contaminated water supply that was in their, in their aquifer right there, that was what was being reviewed. So yes, we could see that there was an obvious health concern with regard to the water that was going to be pre-treated and then reutilized for purposes of processed water. But I just ask that now you've been provided with a water supply plan that's receiving potable water from the Providence Water Supply Board system, I just question whether there's a need for the Department of Health to actually go through and do a complete revised supplemental advisory opinion. And again, if they have comments or concerns, they can certainly present them to you. They can certainly ask us a data request or an information request, and we can provide updated information. With regard to the Water Resources Board, again, it's the Providence Water Supply Board that really is the entity of interest for purposes of water supply. Again, the removal of a pipeline project, Pasco utility pipeline project or otherwise, we don't see how the State Water Resources Board would otherwise have an oversight of a water trucks being used to supply water to a commercial project like this. So I question, again, the need for a State Water Resources Board advisory opinion. And last, with regard to the energy resources, you've already received what we think is a complete opinion with regard to the compliance of the project with the Rhode Island Resilient Act and the goals that were set forth in the Act, and with regard to the air emissions reductions that are expected by this project, both regionally and in Rhode Island as consumed. So, yes, there has been an updated report. There's been a report that's been filed by the EC4, a report of recommendation, a high-quality report. We certainly value that input. That report, as we understand it, took into account this project in their base case analysis, and that report set forth, the start of a conversation, I think was the term that was used, to advise or at least to assist the other policymakers in the state, the General Assembly, and the state agencies with reaching and meeting the goals that were set forth in the Rhode Island Resilient Act. So, you know, we don't have a real strong opinion one way or the other as far as whether you need to get a supplemental statement from Office of Energy Resources with regard to that report. We leave that to the board's discretion. If you think you need further input from them, again, this project will need to comply with whatever legal requirements are imposed by the legislature, by agencies, to implement any of the recommendations that are received to help the state meet the goals of the Rhode Island Resilient Act. And so that's our view about the Office of Energy Resources opinion. And I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair.